Just because wide receiver is a deep position doesn't mean you can't mess it up. The wide receivers you take in rounds 2 through 5 will likely be the difference between beating your college buddies and taking home the ship in your home league, or spending a couple hours in a tattoo parlor getting a last place ass tat for winning your league's toilet bowl. And one of the biggest factors between winning and losing in fantasy football is avoiding wide receiver landmines in fantasy drafts. So on today's episode of the Regression to the Mean podcast, we have 6 wide receivers who we think are overvalued and are losing bets against average draft position. I'm your host, Shaun, and I am joined by my co-hosts, my good friends, and fellow knowers of ball, Keegan and Aidan. Keegan, didn't mean to make you relive PTSD there in the opening, but how you doing,
We'll talk
man?
offline, but I've already submitted a report to HR, so I'm not. Just for the listeners, that's not a real story. That's just fact, or that's fiction, not fact. Sorry.
It's Fugazi.
It's Fugazi. It's not real.
But
yeah, I'm doing all right. I'm sure that people will absolutely hate these takes. It's been pretty consistent that the listeners are all over my fades this year. So that means I'm really right or really wrong. No in between.
You're probably really right, usually. When you
ball knowers here.
Either way, comment, get mad at us. Keep commenting. It's good. It's good for the program. Aidan, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, man. I'm excited to fade like my favorite fade ever. You've heard me fade him once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times, and I'm going to do it again because I was so vindicated last year that I'm doing it once again, even at a cheaper cost. So no, I'm ready to go.
You will not see me defend him this year. Not happening.
Thank you. Thank you. I tried to save you. There was a life raft in the water, and you just swallowed water instead. It was crazy.
I'm afraid you know ball, brother. Okay, so the format of today's episode is simple. We each have 2 wide receivers that we think are overvalued against ADP. Just because one of us is fading someone doesn't always mean the entire podcast is fading the other player, which allows us to hashtag embrace the debate. All right, so that's where we're at. And we're going to go player by player in ADP order. So just keep that in mind. Before we dive in, though, one thing. We're a newer fantasy football channel. The 3 of us started this a year and a half ago. It's been a ton of fun. We're building our audience. If this is the first time you found us, YouTube suggested our video, and you're enjoying the content, we'd love it if you could subscribe to the Regression to Mean podcast. We all have full-time jobs. We do this as a passion project. We one day hope we can turn this into something more, but we can't do it without the support from all of you. So hit the subscribe button. Keegan, what is it? Like, comment, subscribe. What are the Gen Zers saying?
Comment, subscribe.
Okay.
Turn on the notifications.
Hit that bell.
Be nice to Keegan in the comments. Be nice to Keegan in the comments.
That's okay. You can be mean. It's all right. I can take it sometimes.
All right. So we're going to kick things off. I'm going to start things here with the wide receiver 12, the 24th player going off the board, and that is Drake London. I think Drake London is overvalued for 2 reasons. 1, he's never done it before, and he's being drafted like he has. And 2, we don't actually know how good of a player he is. I'm not saying he's bad, but we don't really know. So taking a look at the fact that Drake London's never done it before. In 2022, he finished as the wide receiver 43. In 2023, he finished as the wide receiver 44. He has failed to clear 1,000 yards in both NFL seasons. He has scored 6 total TDs in his NFL career. For context, Rashee Rice scored 7 TDs last year. So Rice has scored more touchdowns in 1 year than Drake London has in 2 years combined. Over the past few seasons, the wide receiver 12 in fantasy has averaged around 16 fantasy points per game. They've cleared 100 catches, 1,000 yards, and 6+ TDs. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible for London to do that. It's probably likely he clears 1,000 yards. It's probably likely he has a good season with Kirk Cousins and Zach Robinson. But we don't know. There's a lot of ambiguity if that can happen. And I'm not saying it won't, but we're basically banking on his ceiling outcome in this instance. And then in terms of how good of a player Drake London is, I think London's a good player. I thought he was a great prospect. Some of the best wide receiver evaluators tend to agree. Like Matt Harmon had him last year, 68th percentile versus man coverage, 77th against zone, 81st against press man, all solid numbers. However, other indicators I like to look at don't always paint a really favorable light. ESPN had him 74th overall in open score last season. Open score is a pretty, positively correlated metric to fantasy success. Like RotoViz has a player range of outcome sim tool I like to use, and he's favorably comped to Cortland Sutton and Mike Williams. Like his high is 17, his median is 11, his low is 6. He probably cashes out around 14, 15 fantasy points per game, probably ends up around like wide receiver 15 or 16. But drafting him at wide receiver 12 in front of Nico Collins, Deebo Samuel, Cooper Kupp, Jalen Waddle, they've all done it before. Like, he's priced at his ceiling. He basically has to score 16 plus fantasy points per game to hit home. I'd rather just bet on someone who's done it before. What are your guys' thoughts on Drake London?
I think you put it best. It's like we're drafting him at his ceiling here. It's like 3 years in a row now. We're just like enamored by this like prospect profile and like what could be, but like I just can't do that in the second round. You really want to start your draft with like, things you feel a lot more confident in and not just like buying into this dream. Don't get me wrong, like Kirk has been an amazing quarterback, Justin Jefferson and London are, different leagues, but, supported very high end wide receiver play. But it's hard for me to like squint and like buy into that and pick call it 24, 25 overall. That's really expensive draft capital. It's like I'd rather buy into the Olave dream. It's pretty similar to like this is a guy that produced in college. This is a guy that was a more elite prospect. So it's like it's really risky. It's either gonna like make or break your fantasy season. Like there's like you don't miss on your second round pick and likely win unless you get Puka Nacua and Kieran Williams off of waivers. It's like you're probably done. So I'm with you here. This is the guy that I'm really drafting.
I will play devil's advocate for the sake of the argument here and say we are drafting him again this high because we are projecting like the leap and bounds improvement their offensive environment will be with Kirk Cousins. I mean, even having like a steady quarterback, like not even Kirk Cousins. I'm trying to think of a good example. Even if you plugged in Gardner Minshew into this offense, that's still an improvement from
for sure
what he had last year. Like the baseline for quarterback improvement for the Falcons is so low. So anything is going to be better for Drake London, but like we are drafting him again at a pretty high mark. Like it's definitely down from last year. And we're still doing this again, though, flirting with him as a top 24 draft pick, top 25. But we're doing it because we're projecting the improvement in the offensive environment for the Falcons. Kirk Cousins should help him greatly. You would like to go back and see like he's done some blow up games before, but there's not much there in his NFL career so far. But
yeah,
I can understand why people want to do it. Sometimes to win your leagues, you have to go off projections and what you haven't seen yet in order to get an edge. So that's the only devil's advocate thing that I'll say.
I think it's fair. I'm not going to fault anyone that wants to take London. And London definitely could be someone. It's week 1 and he scores, 30 fantasy points. And I'm like, oh, damn, I didn't draft enough Drake London. Like, I'm willing to admit that can happen. But at the same time, I will happily take Drake London next year when he's had a great season. It's kind of like that. That's where I'm at. But if he was going a little bit later, I'd be scooping him up. No problem. We've got a mystery fade here for our second one. Keegan's been very mysterious, but he's gonna. I have no idea who this is. So Keegan, why don't you tell us who we're fading here?
It's funny. Aidan actually dropped his name when he said he would rather draft this player than Drake London. But what if I told you that player that Aidan just mentioned that has played 31 career games has only eclipsed 20 fantasy points 3 times in PPR and has never eclipsed 20 points in a fantasy game in half PPR. That wide receiver is Chris Olave.
That's crazy. The man behind the mask. Oh no.
Is Chris Olave. Let's just talk about the Saints last year. Quietly, 8th most touchdowns scored in the NFL in 2023. 8th most touchdowns scored in the NFL. Chris Olave was still the wide receiver 21 in points per game. They were also 4th in plays last year, and it still didn't amount to Chris Olave having like this breakout wide receiver campaign. This year, their offensive line is made up of 2 run-first offensive tackles with little to no experience that are going to start this year. It looks like an absolute mess. If you can't protect Derek Carr, Olave is never going to get the ball where he specializes, which on the downfield routes. And if anything happens to Derek Carr, their backup quarterback situation is abysmal. And I'm not very confident that I want to watch the Saints games 17 times this year to root on Chris Olave because it's going to be painful.
Yeah.
And right now, his current wide receiver ADP is wide receiver 11. Last year's wide receiver 11 scored 17 fantasy points per game, which would be 3-point jump for Olave. Like 3 points in fantasy points per game is a lot of fantasy points to be scored. Last year, coming off of the eighth most touchdowns scored as a team, they're going into this year projected by the betting markets to be the 24th highest scoring offense this year. So in order for him to pay off his ADP, you need them to be better than the 8th scoring offense in the NFL. You need Derek Carr to have a clean pocket, and you need Derek Carr to not be a check down Charlie to Alvin Kamara when said pocket breaks down. The upside case for Chris Olave to me is like really hard to paint. Yeah, I'd rather draft Drake London than Chris Olave. You know, I can see a cleaner path for him because the offensive environment will be better. But here are some of the players that are being drafted like after Olave: Josh Allen, Achane, Laporta, Mahomes, Hurts, Nico Collins, Deebo Samuel, Cooper Kupp. Like, those are just the players that are being drafted like immediately after him. Another thing is his ADOT is so insanely high, and it's because he's really, really good on those routes. Like, he's fantastic deep threat. He doesn't offer much as a yards after catch guy. That's due to the type of routes he's typically running. But if you're going to keep him at that insanely high ADOT, like, it doesn't give a lot of room for yak. It doesn't give you a like big opportunity for layup targets. Like, they would need to have a massive offensive scheme change, which they probably will. They've had the same offensive coordinator since like Sean Payton was there. So they're going to get some changes in the Saints. But Clint Kubiak does not have the cleanest record like as an offensive coordinator either. Like, he's not like going to save the Saints. And the betting markets don't think he's going to save them either, at least from an offensive perspective. So you combine all that together, and I'm looking at the wide receiver 11th off the board. And I'm supposed to draft a guy who's never scored 20 points in half PPR in his entire career and has only done it 3 times in 31 games in full PPR. It is an extremely rich price.
Yeah, it's bizarre. His usage is bizarre. Like, he has an 80% success rate in reception perceptions on slants, and he ran only 13% of his routes or slants. Like, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't.
Everything he's good at, they did. I actually had, like, when you pulled this up, I was like, this is what I had up too, because it's puzzling. Like, his ADOT's silly. His ADOT's silly for how good he is, like, underneath.
I don't want it to feel like I'm like this non-Chris Olave guy, because I'm not. But if I'm going to have to make a pick at this point of the draft, and I'm looking at like all the players around him, like, that's a really hard pill to swallow. Like, I know what Josh Allen's going to be. I'm excited by the upside of Achane. Like, you know, Achane Olave debate. Like, I would never take Olave over Achane if I'm staring at those two on the board in the draft. It's like, if I'm picking before that, I'm not going to reach for him either, because there is people like Garrett Wilson around there. There is not Drake London in ADP, but like, there is Kyron Williams. There is Marvin Harrison Jr. There is Devontae Adams. You know, like, there's just so many good players going around Chris Olave. And I do think a change in offensive environment will help him, but that's almost too much projecting for me, where I have to like galaxy brain and think what that could look like for Chris Olave on some different route tree stuff being used in different ways. But I mean, the Saints are going to suck this year. There's no other way to put it.
My screen.
No, remember those random 4 touchdowns that Jimmy Graham caught last year? He caught the one less touchdown than Chris Olave did last year. It makes no sense.
But I think with Olave too, like, he has done it over London. Like, you look at these finishes. He's been, wide receiver 25, wide receiver 16, averaged 80 yards and almost 1,100 or 80 catches and 1,100 yards through 2 years. So I think, one, I totally agree they're going to suck. I don't need them to be good, though. Like, I don't need the Saints to be good for this to work. I think Clint Kubiak works a ton. Like, they just weren't using him correctly. It just felt like
it's
the routes
super stagnant offense. Yeah. It was very boring to watch, but like, I want to repeat that again. 8th most touchdowns in the NFL as a team, like, very quietly, the Saints. If they regress as a team, you have to take so many touchdowns off the table for them. Are they all going to go to Olave?
He didn't have many to start with.
I
think he's due for positive.
He's due for,
and that's another player that you just pulled up. He is due for positive regression, but that's another player you just pulled up, Rashid Shaheed. That is a really good late value pick, who I think might be able to benefit from some new offensive scheme changes. But I just don't want to watch the Saints for 17 games this year. And maybe that's a silly way to fade somebody, but I don't want to pay a premium either for a player who is being drafted way above what his expected outcome is. And we just talked about with Drake London, like, the picks you make in this round are important.
Yeah, I mean, you had A.T. Perry score 4 touchdowns randomly. You had Jimmy Graham score 4 touchdowns randomly. Shaheed had 5. Like, it's just kind of crazy. Like that, he reminds me of early career DJ Moore, where DJ Moore would always go
No
over like
touchdowns.
1,000, but just no touchdowns.
That's a good comp.
Just no touchdowns. Like I think
That's
he's
definitely
super,
a good fantasy comp.
Similar
super
skill set
talented.
too.
But I like
He's
his
done
Sims.
it at least. That was my thing over London. Like he's done it. He's done it twice. Drake
Yeah.
London really hasn't done anything yet. So like, I get the skepticism with both. Like, I'm skeptical too about Olave, but if I had to pick one, like, I'm going to pick the guy that's done it. Especially when they're right next to each other in the rankings. Personally,
I think it's fair though, Keegan. Like drafting someone high who probably won't have good quarterback play always sucks. Like it's never
shitty unless it's
never fun. It's never.
Yeah, you
never
have to
fun.
like. I mean, think of why we take Devontae Adams where we take him is because like he's one of the best receivers, like at least of our NFL watching career. And it's like you have to bake that in. And I'm not saying Chris Olave is a bad wide receiver, but like some people get the nod because they are elite at what they do. And I mean, Chris Olave is such a good deep threat, but I know it can be so much more than that. And I could easily be like so wrong on this if they just do some simple offensive changes. But it's kind of like Drake London, right? Like you said. If I'm wrong this year on Chris Olave, that's okay because I don't think he has much more to go than where he's being drafted at, which is kind of the whole basis of my take.
They're very similar profiles. I think Olave's benefited from probably a better quarterback and situation, but man, like,
for sure.
Yeah, I get wanting to draft the guys who score touchdowns over the guys who don't. I'm not going to fault you for that one. It's just math. That's analytics. Moving on to our next guy here. My second fade, and again, we're going by ADP here. Wide receiver 19. He's the 39th 39th player off the board. That is none other than Stefon Diggs. So, like Keegan, when we just recorded
this hurts me.
When we just recorded our rankings episode, Keegan was like, I have Dell over Diggs. And I was like, dude, I already have Diggs pretty low. So I was like, I'd have to really drop him to have Dell over him just based off of ADP. But I think Diggs is overvalued for 3 reasons. Like his face plant down the stretch in 2023, I don't think that was an aberration, but a sign of age decline. Like from week 10 to the fantasy championship last year, like take a look at this. It was bleak. Like this is bleak. What happened here? He was the wide receiver 67 for that stretch, finishing just behind Noah Brown and Wan'Dale Robinson, and just in front of OBJ and Greg Dortch. And like what makes this worse is he did this on wide receiver 38 usage. It's like the usage wasn't good, but he was super inefficient. And like Matt Harmon believes that a lot of this happened because of his inability to win downfield. So he essentially, Harmon's saying he's not very good at this point in his career running corner routes, 9 routes, and post routes, but he's really good at running slant routes. So I think what happens here is Diggs at this point in his career on a new team is going to be the go-to slot wide receiver for this offense. But I think Nico Collins is going to operate at the X, and I think Tank Dell is going to operate as the flanker. So I think that limits his upside. I think it creates a solid floor for him. Like he finished as the wide receiver 14 last year, competing for targets against Shakir, Kincaid, and Gabe Davis. He's competing against big boys now with Tank Dell and Nico Collins. Like it's hard to get targets away from those guys, and like he's the wide receiver 19 right now in his ADP. Like he needs to finish with over 15 points per game to do that. Now I think that's definitely achievable, but I don't know, man. I feel like this is a guy that probably is a steady Eddie pick, but I don't necessarily know if that translates to a big home run. Like his Sims have him right here, right as the wide receiver, like wide receiver 19, finishing at 15 overall as PPR mid. So like, I think he'll be a fine pick. I just don't feel super excited, and I'd rather draft guys like Jalen Waddle, DJ Moore, Devonta Smith, Mark Andrews, and Trey McBride over him. And he's like an aging slot receiver, and I think he's similar to like Keenan Allen, and you can get Keenan Allen 3 to 4 rounds later. So that's my take on Diggs. I think Diggs is a fine pick, but I do think he's more name brand, and that's why he's kind of being driven up the board. But I know, Keegan, you said this one hurts you. Do you have any opinions on Diggs at this point?
Just how far the mighty have fallen, you know? I was just talking to Aidan about how I drafted Diggs in the first round of a draft last year before we all started recording today. It's just like, Any
It
other
is over.
offense that he went to, I think it could have been like an argument for him to still be fantasy relevant, but he does land in a wonderful quarterback situation, a team on the up and up. But if I want to piece the offense and I didn't get Nico, I'll wait and take Tank after Diggs, and Tank is usually going after Diggs in most drafting formats right now. So it's tough. Yeah, they're going to probably move him into a more slot role, like you said, and those really high value targets that could be big plays for touchdowns are no longer part of Stefon Diggs' games, which was made him so exciting too, especially with the Bills when Josh Allen kind of unlocked that. But I think that part of his career is coming to a close. So
Yeah. I got nothing else here. I'm gonna stay clear, most likely. Unless he takes a dive down the board. But no, I'm not really dying to draft him. The vibes were really bad towards the end of last year.
I would not be shocked if he scored 15 fantasy points per game, but I'm trying to swing for upside. It's like I think Diggs is a safe pick. I just think he's going a little too high. That's basically where I'm at with Diggs. If he fell in drafts, I think he's actually a pretty solid like wide receiver 3 option. I just don't think I'd really love him to be in my starting 2 at wide receiver. He'd be pretty sick as a flex. I'm not gonna lie, but
cool flex.
That's kind of where I'm at here. Moving on to our next guy here, Aidan. It's your time to shine. Tell us why you're again. you can't stop fading this guy. You faded him in best ball. Now you're fading him in redraft.
So I said I wouldn't do it.
What do you think?
I said I wouldn't do it back then. I was like, this is just a best ball fade, boys. But then the more I look into his ADP, just like the more I can't do it. So he's going as a wide receiver 26, which is just about 50 overall right now. Just like looking at some of the other guys, like again, this just comes down to like who else is around you in this range, and I can't talk myself into it. You've got guys like Malik Neighbors, Amari Cooper, George Pickens, got Tank Dell, Christian Kirk, Scary Terry. Like I love a lot of those guys compared to Zay Flowers, and it's not like he had a bad year by any means. He was wide receiver 31 in his rookie season. Had 850 yards, 5 touchdowns, like very productive rookie season. Like this was nothing against what he did. There's a couple of reasons why I'm not really in on him, though. I don't see it getting much better for Zay Flowers in terms of his production. If you look at Lamar Jackson historically, how many wide receivers do you think have eclipsed 1,000 yards for him?
Hollywood
did it one time in 2019, and he did it by 8 yards. It's just...
Is that the only one to go over 1,000?
It is the only time in Lamar Jackson's career that a wide receiver has eclipsed 1,000 yards.
Has Mark even done it?
Mark's done it. Mark did it that year as well. I think he's done it 3 times. Maybe it was 2.
Okay.
While I was looking, Mark Andrews is still there. Rashad Bateman's getting a ton of buzz. They just drafted a big, red zone target in Tez Walker. Like, Zay Flowers is not a jump ball guy by any means. And then you look at the rushing attack too. In comes the king. This was already a top 3 rushing offense in football. We've talked about it too in previous episodes. Their defense probably won't be as good, but still a very strong unit. At all 3 levels, they've got guys. I just don't see a change in a whole lot for Zay Flowers. I think he's a good player. But at his ADP, like I just see so much more upside. Like Malik Neighbors and Zay Flowers are next to each other in the rankings. Like I think Malik Neighbors could look like legitimately have like 40 more targets than Zay Flowers. Terry McLaurin, he's done it. He's been around that wide receiver 20. He's still the number 1 read in his offense. You guys know I love Christian Kirk. It's just if he was closer to like wide receiver 30, 35, I think I'm feeling better about him. But again, it's just like historically, Lamar Jackson doesn't support wide receivers. We're drafting him as, a wide receiver 2, a fringe wide receiver 2 here. And I think, he's just firmly a wide receiver 3, and that's fine. But I'm not going to pay up for it. I'm fine missing on this one. Like, I don't see a world whatsoever where this guy cracks like top 18, top 15 wide receivers. What he maybe, goes up to wide receiver 20, maybe. I'm good off that. I'm just not very interested there.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, like if you look at the Sims here, he's got better Sims than Drake London, but I would say his high is 17.3, his mid's around 11. He probably ends up scoring 12, 13 fantasy points, PPR fantasy points per game, probably.
Yeah, way more upside around him.
I do think, though, he showed some pretty promising stuff in his reception perception profile. He's really good against zone, 90th percentile.
Really good against zone. He's really good against zone. Press,
not
so much, but he's tiny.
That's encouraging. Keegan, do you have a lean on Zay at all in drafts?
I don't know. I don't think his value's terrible. Like I'll flirt with some Zay Flowers stuff. I think what makes him the most exciting is the ability to win in broken down plays. Like
Yeah.
he's so shifty. Like when the play breaks down and Lamar Jackson has the legs to extend plays, like Zay Flowers is a really, good person to have on your team when it comes to that. So could be some busted play potential, but those are not things you want to bank on. I just think he's really good with the ball in his hands. Maybe some more growth as a wide receiver could lead them to manufacturing a couple extra touches here and there. And he still is the number 2 option with Lamar Jackson, which is not a bad thing. But I think he's probably right around where he should be going. I think Lamar and Andrews should go off the board before him, but I'm happy to draft Zay Flowers with where he's at. But I think the boom potential is not much there, but I think his floor should rise this year. Now that he's not a rookie, another year in the offense, more trust with Lamar Jackson. I think it's an all right pick.
Yeah, he killed me this week against the Jaguars in the first. I think that was the second week of the fantasy playoffs or the first. Oh, that was
brutal.
That was brutal. That was a rough one. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to give you too much pushback. I think if Zay is on the board, I think I wouldn't hesitate to take him. I like Zay Flowers, but I agree. Like, what is the ceiling, especially when you list some of the other guys?
On his game log there, Shaun?
Yeah.
Pretty close. I was going to say, Zay Flowers only needs one more 20-point game under his belt to have the same amount of 20-point games as Chris Olave.
No. Generational hater, bro.
Oh, I mean, he's not that wrong, though. He's not that wrong. Yeah, he's really not. Okay, moving on to the next guy here. Keegan, your mystery fade number 2. I think you kind of spoiled it.
Yeah, I think you guys are on to me a little bit here. And I teased it when we were talking about the wide receiver tiers and we were discussing Roma Dunze. But yeah, I just think Keenan Allen is getting a little old. I think it might be time to go to bed, Grandma, for Keenan Allen. I'll address the good stuff first because I know people are like, this is so stupid. But in the beginning of the season, I think Keenan Allen will be great. I think he will be a blanket for Caleb Williams. Like, he is going to be a fantastic outlet for a rookie quarterback who is still very, very good on short and intermediate routes. And he was a target hog last year, and that was very evident at him winning in these short and intermediate routes. Like, his open rate was insane last year.
Insane.
Success against man is still good, but it's falling off a little bit over the years, especially in 2023. And he's going to graduate into a role, and we've talked a little bit about how Stefon Diggs is getting put in this role, but like he's going to like the retirement home of like electric wide receivers, aka the power slot position, in an offense that will be very potent this year. But it's hard. There's a lot of decisions to make when you're drafting fantasy wide receivers, especially in a crowded room. And sometimes you have to make a difficult one that doesn't seem right at the time. But I can't like all the wide receivers in the Bears rooms. I flag planted Caleb Williams. I've talked about how I like DJ Moore this year. I've talked about how much I've drafted Khalil Herbert, for crying out loud. Like, I'm all in on the team, but somebody's got to be the odd man out. And for me, it's Keenan. Year 12 of his NFL career. Data historically tells us that there's a pretty steep drop off in the back half of their careers, especially from year 9 to 11. Last year, I think, was a anomaly because when you look at expected fantasy points per game,
look at this,
and what he did last year. Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely insane. But no wide receiver had more expected fantasy points per game than Keenan Allen, and yet he scored 21. He scored a little like less than half a point per game than he was expected to score at the highest rate. Like, he was basically dead on his expected usage. It's because of the type of targets they were. Like, he's not going to break loose for big plays. He's not going to be somebody who's going to win downfield on the sidelines anymore. Like, this point of his career, he's getting put into a more slot role, like I talked about. On top of that, the Bears give DJ Moore a huge extension. Well-deserved. I think DJ Moore is like a cornerstone for the Bears next coming years and build around Caleb Williams. Keenan Allen's the only one that's playing on a one-year deal here. Like, he's the only one who does not have long-term plans with the Bears. He's been brought in, and I think it makes their wide receiver room great. They also draft Roma Dunze with the 9th pick in the draft, whose ADP is wide receiver 44. And right now, Keenan Allen's is wide receiver 30 in PPR. And if I'm trying to win a fantasy league and I'm looking at the board and I want something that's going to win me at the end of the year when I'm picking this range, like I don't know if I can pick the year 12 wide receiver who's going to be playing primarily in the slot, or if I want to pick the top 10 draft pick that's going like a full 14 wide receivers later than Keenan Allen. Like I think I'm either going to draft DJ Moore or I'm going to wait and draft Rome Odunze. I think their price is all very justified, but for Keenan Allen, like there's a couple people in this range that I might rather like pivot towards. I think Calvin Ridley's good in this range. There's also two good quarterbacks I like in this range with Dak Prescott and Kyler Murray. Christian Kirk is also in this range, who's like a de facto number one wide receiver being drafted the same spot as Keenan Allen, who, like I said at the beginning of this, I think is going to have a really strong start to the year. If he leads the team in targets for the first couple of weeks, I wouldn't be shocked. But at the end of the year, Rome comes on. DJ Moore is a big factor. Like I want to bet on the late season surge of the rookie, and I think I'm just going to step away from Keenan Allen.
We have a Bears. You're fading two Bears now, back-to-back episodes. But you did flag plant a bear. He did flag plant a bear.
Yeah.
How do you think this is going to shake out? As someone you've been following this team really closely all off season, how should we approach this in your opinion? Do you think Keegan's onto something here?
It's hard to say. I think one part of your argument that like I could debunk right away is like that like he's falling off at all. He like this is a guy that hasn't been outside of the top 14 wide receivers aside from one since what is this 20 what year is that? I can't scroll far enough. What the last 8 seasons. Like this is a guy that's been doing it at the highest level for almost a decade straight now. They're gonna pass a ton. You know, this could be a very pass happy offense. I think, you know, really good safety blanket for Caleb, and like who's to say that they're gonna, you know, take him off the field as the year goes on. You know, it's like this is a guy that is like a professional separator. But in terms of like, I think it kind of comes back to the Zay Flowers case. These guys are, you know, only 5 wide receivers apart. Like, what's the bull case for Keenan Allen? You know, if you're really high on DJ Moore, you know, that's really hard. You know, like if we think DJ Moore has another, you know, top 10, top 15 season in him, like Keenan can't pop too. Like it's, you know, it's very rare that, you know, 2 wide receivers can support that level of production. So, you know, I kind of understand your argument around the, like, you know, more upside in this range. You know, I still like Keenan Allen. I think he's gonna be an awesome football player for the Chicago Bears, but like, you know, I think you're probably getting him right around where he'll be. You know, maybe he overperforms ADP a little bit, but you know, he was wide receiver 8 last year. Like, there's no shot that happens next year unless for whatever reason DJ Moore gets hurt. You know, DJ Moore is the one there, and that's, you know, that's been very clear since, you know, camp and everything.
The thing is like the Sims love him because he just had such a huge statistical outlier season before he got hurt. So like his average is coming in at 16.7. That's a really good number for where he's being drafted. Open Score loved him. ESPN's Open Score had him as the best receiver at getting open last season.
He's a separator, man. He's so good.
And then you look at Keenan Allen's reception perception. It's pretty good. I mean, like it's just crushing on curls and slants, flats and comebacks, like all these middle of the field slant routes that he does really well at. I do think Keegan's, like, 2 things can be true here. One, Keenan Allen really benefited from probably the best run out imaginable last year with the Chargers. Literally everyone got hurt, like, and their defense sucked. So they just ran a shit ton of plays and the offense just went through Keenan Allen. And at the same time, like, that's why he benefited from it. But I also don't know if he's like fallen off. It's like that's the hard thing for me. I was super high on Jackson Smith and Jigba last year, and I think Rome Odunze is a better player than Jackson Smith and Jigba is. But at the same time, I think Keenan Allen's a way better player than Tyler Lockett is. And this is the same offensive coordinator that didn't really play JSN. And I just think it might be hard for Odunze to jump or leap Keenan Allen. And that's nothing on Odunze. Odunze's reception perception is absurd. And I'm going to bet on Odunze in fantasy drafts. I do just think, though, that Keenan Allen's still really good. So I struggle with it. Like, and he's very similar to Diggs. So if you want that profile, I'd rather just take Keenan Allen way later. But at the same time, if you want to draft someone who isn't, you know, going to get their AARP card, I'm not going to fault you for it either. You know, he's old.
Yeah.
Been doing it a while.
I know I made a joke about him, like old, and like we're sending him to the retirement home for power slot receivers that just like can't win on the outside anymore. But he hasn't dropped off that much. Like
No.
he's still like wildly successful in these short and intermediate routes. I mean, the chart speaks for itself, and like who Keenan Allen is today is, I think, exactly what the Bears are going to have him do, which is totally fine. But like for fantasy, what does that look like? Like Keenan Allen has also benefited from a lot of injuries to wide receiver rooms in the careers that he's been in the Chargers, and has been the de facto healthy guy, which means uptick in targets, more offensive output funneling straight through him. I mean, there's been so many times where Mike Williams missed games and Keenan Allen benefits from it. So he's had a very pure run out being a number one option. But if you just try and think of it like in a non PPR perspective, like if you're looking at half PPR, I think the argument to be made for me is a little bit easier. In PPR formats, it's a tricky fade because like, yeah, he might catch the first couple of weeks. Aidan, correct me if I'm wrong, but like he might get targeted 10, 11 times in the first couple of weeks. Like
for sure.
On a lot of easy catches.
Tennessee,
So
Houston, Indy. Yeah, I mean, he could have it.
like the beginning of his schedule is very, very promising. But the other thing I want to call out, I'm glad you pulled it up, is like week 7 bye is pretty early for a football team to have a bye. And we all know how those post bye rookie bumps go.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what my thought process is. I'm not like hating on Keenan Allen. Like he's still really good at what he does, but that's what he'll be doing is everything that he's good at. And like his role will be no more, no less. They have a very good elite winner on the outside in DJ Moore. And I'm just really high on Rome. It might be more of a Rome Odunze take than it is a Keenan Allen take.
It's fair. Odunze is an amazing prospect, and he's the cheapest one you can get by far. Yeah. So it's like there really wasn't that big of a difference between Neighbors, MHJ, and Odunze. All fantastic prospects, but I do think Neighbors and MHJ really benefit from zero competition, at least in the wide receiver department to start. But yeah, I mean, I can get behind it. Like I don't know if Keenan Allen's going to win leagues where you draft him. So I respect it. I respect it. Last guy here. This is a 2-for-1. This is a BOGO because you faded him last year, and
we're going back in.
Yeah, he just won't die, old man. It just won't happen yet. So Aidan's gonna keep going here. He's gonna fade the wide receiver 42, the 99th player off the board in Christian Watson.
I'm not doing it. Yeah, you can't make me draft this guy in redraft. It is like the profile is just like redraft nightmare with this guy. So like Shaun mentioned, what was he going last year? Like wide receiver, probably like mid 20s. Where was he last year?
Yeah, he was 6th round, 5th round guy last year.
Yeah, so cheaper this year. So it's like why are you so out on this? He's wide receiver 42. Relatively low cost. I'd rather just take a swing on someone else at this point. Like I would rather have Jameson Williams and Christian Watson by far this year. You've got old people like Hopkins, you've got Rome over there, you've got Ladd, you've got JSN. I literally just have zero interest in Christian Watson in any redraft format whatsoever. The guy's 25 years old, but like we know, he's notorious for missing time. 11 games so far through 2 seasons. We've heard about his hamstrings all off season. It's, the imbalance of muscle, yada, yada, yada. The dude just can't keep his body right and is just kind of a nightmare there. At this point, I find it hard to believe that he's better than like the third best wide receiver on that team. Romeo Doubs, very secure there. Jaden Reed has probably the most unique skill set out of all those guys. And then I love Dontavian Wicks. I think Keegan mentioned it in our tier episode. Like people have kind of been Wicks pilled. And I absolutely have, and I'm going to keep doing it because I think he's awesome. I think like he's the best route runner on that team, in my opinion. And then you're not even looking at Josh Jacobs. You got both of their young tight ends. Like there's so many mouths to feed. That plus like his inability to stay on the field. I find it hard to believe that if you're going to take a swing on one of the Packers wide receivers, like why is this the one you're swinging on? Dontavian Wicks is significantly cheaper. Romeo Doubs significantly cheaper. Jaden Reed's not, as cheap, but he's done it. Like Jaden Reed did a full season last year in his rookie year. So I'm just not doing it. It's just like it's so hard to get excited about this guy. It feels like we're like 1 year away from being out of the NFL if he can't stay healthy.
No.
So no, it's no. But like I get the upside though. He's 12 touchdowns in 2 very short seasons, 1,000 yards. Like can absolutely
Chase Claypool.
He's literally Chase Claypool. What was his name? Martavis Bryant. Like it's like the flashes are there, which is why I think people like keep coming back in for more. It's just like he kind of teases it, and then it's like, just kidding, I'm out for another month. Just kidding. I think you have way better swings to take at the end of the draft. Like, I'll take Jameson Williams over Christian Watson, and I have been mean to Jameson Williams and my evaluation of him going into this year.
He's like the exact opposite of Chris Olave, where all he does is score either 4 points or like 20 points. It's kind of nuts how many 20-point games he's put up in like the short amount of games he's played. I don't know. You guys got to see the Sims here. It's crazy. It's literally like the most. Man. It's the most Christian Watson list ever. MVS, DJ Chark, Kenny Stills, Mike Williams,
Sammy Watkins. What a good one. What a good one there. He'll give you like one good week. Yeah. No.
You got the Chris Godwin year 3 breakout is showing up here. That's interesting. You got Amari Cooper. Like there's some names.
The Sims hate him.
There's enough names. Like, because look, even like his PPR high is still relatively high because of his upside and what he's done so far. But like this wide range of outcomes, 5, 9, and 16 in terms of low, mid, and high, and then his PPR average is around 10. That sounds about right. Like, that honestly does. And Matt Harmon, we talk about reception perception a lot. He does not think he's a good route runner. 26th percentile against man, 27th against press, 8th against zone. He thinks he's a role player. Just like go run nines.
All he can
posts,
do is take the top
corners.
Off. All he does is take the top off.
And that player
screens.
Yeah, I mean that player's like interesting, but I just don't know how like super talented he is. And I think there's just more talented guys in that room. And like, I was a big backer last year. I loved the upside.
Yeah,
but
you were Watson pilled last year. Yeah. Let's not put it lightly.
Yeah,
big backer would be an understatement.
I was a big backer because I just bought in on that end of year performance he had. And, I'm a big year 2 guy. So sure. I was excited. And then, you look at what he did in his last 2 games before injury, 20 points, 27. And then, he hurts his hamstrings again. So it's like, but look at before. I'd argue, like, everyone keeps saying he ran the most routes. Their offense was terrible when he was out here running all these routes. Like, their offense got so much better the more Jaden Reed played. So I don't know. Like, I get the idea of wanting to draft somebody tied to Jordan Love, big play upside, but I'd rather take Dobbs straight up over Watson at this point.
100%. He's going to be on the field significantly more, and Jordan Love trusts him, dude. That, like, Dobbs is Jordan Love's favorite wide receiver, and in that room, like, no debate.
Sounds like it. Keegan, are you like going to buy the post hype sleeper with Christian Watson, or are you out?
No, I it's really tough because he's super exciting when he does hit, and like that's what you want in fantasy. That's what wins you matchups. But you guys said it. I think Dobbs is going to be on the field the most out of any Packers wide receiver, and then you got to find time for Jaden Reed because he's honestly so good. I mean, look, 10 touchdowns on 75 touches last year is an absurd rate. Like, Jaden Reed will definitely regress. That is just way too efficient, but he's very good. I think Wicks is good. Josh Jacobs is very good. They have 2 very viable tight ends. Like, trying to pencil in a week for Christian Watson is going to be agonizing. Like, even if he could get you a really high ceiling outcome in a week, like, it's going to be so painful. Like, he might just be a Gabe Davis type.
Could be.
Like, I don't know if I want to. That's a really frustrating type of fantasy wide receiver to have on your roster. So I'm probably not clicking him in redraft. I've got my fair share of him in best ball for sure. Like, I'm pretty in on the Packers offense this year, but yeah, redraft, that would be a tough pill to swallow. You'll bench him 1 week and he'll go off for 27 if he's healthy. And the week you start him, it's a 2-burger and you lose your matchup. So.
Yeah, I think he's a fine pick because the upside, but I've seen people online that are like, he's the one that you're going to want. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm buying that. But that's it. 6 guys. 6 guys that we're fading here. Christian Watson. You got Zay Flowers. You got Stefon Diggs. Keenan Allen. Who else do we got? Chris Olave. We've got some big names here. We got Drake London, and who else am I missing? No, that's 6. That's a list. That's a list, guys.
A list.
Who are we putting on the thumbnail?
It's got to be
Olave,
London, right?
It's got to be Olave or Drake London, yeah.
People are obsessed with Drake. It's got to be Drake. I don't know. we'll piss people off with either one. So it's got to be one of these two.
Man, the London stands. They don't want to give up. They really don't. I get it. I have him in Dynasty. I'm really excited for him in Dynasty this year. I just in redraft would love to see him do it. Like that's my whole thing.
Yeah,
before I draft
you already
him as the
paid
wide
for it
receiver
years
12.
ago. Like you've got it. But this year you're paying up handsomely.
All right, that's 6 guys that we are fading at cost. We're going to be talking through our targets a little bit later in the week. Stay tuned for that. Thank you. Aidan Keegan is joining as always. And till next time, everybody.